Your mind wakes up rich or poor. Have you ever stopped to think that what happens in the first hours of the day decides whether you will feel powerful or defeated even before the world wakes up? Sounds crazy, right? But that's exactly where the paradox lies. While most people chase results throughout the day, true control happens invisibly, in the silence of your dawn. And it is precisely by ignoring this moment that so many people feel trapped, anxious, and directionless. What few people understand is that it's not about extreme effort or fleeting motivation. It's about small acts done with intention, repeated actions that align your mind and heart even before facing real problems. It's almost counterintuitive. The world screams, but whoever speaks to themselves first gains an invisible advantage. And that advantage defines how you react to the chaos that will arise. Imagine if you could start each day with clarity, faith, and purpose without depending on luck, motivation, or inspiration of the moment. Imagine transforming your life, in visible order from within, in consistent decisions, quiet courage, and active focus. It seems simple, but it's powerful. And it's the secret that Napoleon Hill touched upon without realizing it, and which the Bible profoundly confirms. And the best part? This principle doesn't require hours or complicated rituals. It only requires attention and a decision early on, before the world steals your rhythm, your energy, and your focus. And it's precisely at this point that you'll discover how to reprogram your mind and activate a prosperity that begins from within. Even before coffee, ready to understand how the first 2 hours define more than just your day. They define your life? Then stick with me and see how to transform the start of your day into the greatest ally you ever imagined. The first 2 hours of the day determine whether your mind wakes up rich or poor. You wake up, and even before you get out of bed, there's already a silent battle raging inside. Sounds like an exaggeration? Look, it's not. As first hours, they are like the moist soil of the day. What you plant at the beginning becomes the pattern, the climate, the direction. If you start in a hurry, anxiously, and on autopilot, your mind learns to operate in scarcity. And in the end, you call that normal life. But when you decide to renew the mind early on, with faith and discipline, you change course before the world tries to grab the steering wheel. Now, here's the part that few people realize. It's not just about thinking positive, okay? It's about who governs your inner self when no one is watching. If you wake up and immediately reach for your phone, you're opening the doors of your mind to any voice. Bad news, demands, comparisons, noise, everything at once. And then, without realizing it, you spend the day trying to fix a heart that started out already messed up. But when you protect the first hours, you create a type of prosperity internally. Clarity, peace, focus. And this spills over into the rest of the day like dominoes. Want a simple and practical example? Tomorrow, try this. Before touching your phone, take a deep breath and set aside 5 minutes just to clear your mind. Say something like, in a low voice, "Today I choose faith. I choose direction. I choose renew the mind." It may seem small, but small things, big results. That's how the game changes. And then comes the question that changes everything. If the beginning of the day is the battlefield, what is the first weapon you will use? And why is it precisely the one most ignored by almost everyone? Whoever controls the start of their day controls the rest of their life. Let's be honest here. Straight up. If you don't decide how your day begins, someone else decides for you. And usually that someone is chaos. Notifications, invented emergencies, demands from others, racing thoughts. All of that enters your mind before you even remember who you are and where you're going. Then the day becomes reaction, not direction. You spend hours busy but not productive, tired, but without real progress, and this repeats itself like an invisible loop. There's a simple yet powerful principle. Whoever governs the morning governs the mind. Whoever governs the mind governs the choices. That's why so many people say, "My day was difficult," without realizing that the difficulty began before breakfast. The start of the day is like the rudder of a ship. A small adjustment there completely changes the destination later on. And when you take that control with discipline, then something curious happens. The anxiety loses its power, and prosperity. It begins to form first from the inside. Think about it. If you wake up already complaining, what do you think you'll reap? Now, if you start the day with intention, even if it's just 5 minutes of silence, a short reading, a sincere prayer, you set a pattern. It's not about having a perfect morning. It's about having a morning.conscious. And here's the inevitable hook. If the enemy knows that the start of the day is so crucial, why does he try so hard to distract you precisely at that time? Distraction is not random. It is strategic. Pay attention to this, because many people wake up here, but few realize it. Morning distraction doesn't happen by chance. It's strategic, silent, and extremely efficient. Nobody wakes up thinking, "I'm going to lose control of my day." But that's exactly what happens when you surrender the first few minutes, and then the first few hours, to any external stimulus. The mind goes into reactive mode, and when that happens, the faith, he loses ground before he even tries to speak. There's a recurring pattern. The more potential you have, the more noise appears early on. It's as if the world is in a hurry to grab your attention before you can align yourself internally. An endless feed, messages that weren't urgent, thoughts that pop up out of nowhere. All of this seems normal, but it's not innocent. When you start the day distracted, you start the day fragmented. And a fragmented mind rarely builds anything. Prosperity, clarity, or firm decisions. Now look at the contrast. When you choose to start the day in silence, even if only for a few minutes, something changes. The mind slows down, the heart regulates itself, and you begin to renew the mind in a natural way. It's not mysticism, it's practice. It's like adjusting the frequency of a radio before hearing the right song. And this opens up an important point. If distraction tries to steal the beginning, what exactly happens when you protect that beginning with intention and discipline? The mind is malleable in the morning, but only obeys those who take command. There's a detail that almost no one tells you. Your mind doesn't wake up decided, it wakes up available. In the early hours of the day, the mind is more open, less defensive, and more receptive to commands. That's why random thoughts seem stronger at this time, not because they're true, but because they find an open door. If you don't take control, the mind accepts any suggestion as if it were law. And then, without realizing it, you start the day believing in things you never consciously chose. Here's something simple, yet profound. The mind doesn't respond to what you want. It responds to what you do. He repeats it with conviction. When you wake up and immediately put yourself in a scarcity mindset, it's going to be difficult. There won't be enough time. Today is going to be tough. You're not being realistic. You're programming your own day. But when you decide to use that moment to renew the mind, even with short sentences, aligned with faith, you begin to build a completely different internal state. A very practical example. Instead of starting the day by solving problems, start defining identity. Something like, "Today I act with clarity. Today I choose discipline. Today I don't operate on autopilot." This seems too simple. I know. But it's exactly the kind of thing that works because it goes straight to the root. And the most interesting thing is that, when you do this for a few days in a row, you start to notice something curious happening in your decisions throughout the day. And that's precisely what prepares the ground for the next point. What you do before the world wakes up defines how you react when it screams. There's something powerful, and even a little counterintuitive, about this. The best preparation for a difficult day isn't strength, it's advance. When you start your day ahead of the rest of the world, you're not just saving time, you're gaining internal position. It's like going up to a viewpoint before the city wakes up. Everything becomes clearer, more organized, less chaotic. Those who arrive late to the day also arrive emotionally behind, always playing catch-up. Many people believe that productivity begins with action, but it doesn't. It begins with alignment. If you don't decide who you are early on, the day will decide for you. And the day isn't kind. It demands, pressures, distracts. That's why, when you protect the first few hours with discipline and faith, you create an emotional buffer. Problems still exist, of course, but they don't dominate your mind like before. That's prosperity emotional, that which underpins any external outcome. Want a really realistic example? Think of two scenarios. In the first, you wake up, immediately check messages, respond to demands, and start the day in firefighting mode. In the second, you wake up, breathe, quiet yourself for a few minutes, and decide how you want to operate that day. In which of these scenarios do you think your mind is more focused? Exactly. It's not about having more time, it's about mental priority. And when that becomes a habit, something interesting starts to happen in your choices. Because that's when the silent turning point occurs. You begin to realize that it's not the day that tires you. It's the lack of direction right from the start. When you learn to renew the mind before the world demands answers, you start responding clearly instead of reacting impulsively. And this opens up an even deeper point, one that almost no one connects with, but which completely changes the game when you understand it. Renewing the mind isn't about motivation, it's about daily training. Here's a key difference between those who truly make a change and those who are merely enthusiastic. Renewing the mind isn't about feeling something beautiful. Training your brain is like training a muscle. Motivation goes up and down. Training builds a foundation. When you understand this, you stop waiting for willpower to start the day well and start creating it. Simple rituals, repeatable actions that maintain focus even when your mood isn't helping. And look, that changes everything, because it frees you from emotional dependence. Think of it this way. If you don't train your mind early in the day, it will train itself. But in the wrong way. It learns from what it consumes, what it hears, what it repeats. That's why starting the day with discipline. It's not rigidity. It's care. A short, consistent workout creates practical faith, the kind that doesn't disappear when things get tough. It's like brushing your teeth. It's not exciting, but it prevents a big problem later. Want something applicable right now? Choose a fixed mental training for the mornings. 3 truths you declare: clarity, courage, consistency. 1. Short, uplifting read. And 1 concrete decision for the day. Nothing grandiose. Small and consistent wins. Over time you realize that prosperity, it starts to appear first in the choices. Fewer impulses, fewer reactions, more direction. And when that takes hold, an inevitable question arises. If training changes the mind, what happens when it also changes the heart? When the mind is aligned, decisions become simpler. There's a quiet relief that almost no one associates with the first hours of the day: reduced mental fatigue. When you start the day out of sorts, every decision becomes a burden, even the small ones. What to answer, where to go, what to do first. Everything is exhausting. But when you train your mind early on, something changes behind the scenes. decisions begin to flow. Not because the problems have disappeared, but because the mind is organized enough to deal with them without drama. Here's an important detail. Clarity doesn't arise in the midst of chaos. It arises before it. When you renews the mind in the morning, you create an internal filter. Not everything gets in. Not everything affects you. Not everything deserves an immediate response. That's mental maturity, and it goes hand in hand with discipline. A trained mind learns to say, "This is not a priority right now," and this simple phrase saves energy, time, and emotions. In practice, this manifests itself in a very concrete way. You begin to realize that you react less impulsively, postpone decisions that would previously have been hasty, and choose better where to invest your attention. This is where prosperity it begins to materialize, not as immediate money, but as better decisions, and better decisions build better results. But this internal organization leads to the next level, because when the mind slows down, something deeper begins to take over. When you change the way you start your day, the world stops dictating your pace. Here's where a shift happens that few consciously realize. When you take control of the start of your day, the world loses its power to push you from one side to the other. Before, any urgency seemed important. Now you begin to feel that not everything needs an immediate response. This isn't coldness, it's self-government. A mind that has been organized early on doesn't panic easily, because it already knows who's in charge. It's curious how this works in practice. You still receive messages, still face problems, still deal with pressure, but something internal has changed. Instead of reacting, you respond. Instead of running, you choose the pace. That is applied faith. Not the abstract kind, but the kind that translates into posture, tone of voice, and firmer decisions. And the more you repeat this pattern, the more natural it becomes. Over time, you realize you no longer need to save yourself throughout the day, because you've already positioned yourself early on. Discipline. The early hours create an emotional foundation that supports everything that comes after. And here something even deeper emerges. When the world stops ordering you around, you begin to hear another voice better, more subtle, clearer, that has always been there, waiting for silence to be perceived. True change doesn't happen outside. It begins in the invisible. There comes a point when you realize something almost disconcerting. Most of your life is decided in places no one sees. It's not in the meeting. It's not in the difficult conversation. It's not in the unexpected problem. It's before. It's in that silent moment when you choose how you're going to think, what you're going to focus on, and what stance you're going to take. When you understand this, you stop trying to fix the day in the midst of chaos and start preparing the ground right from the beginning. Most people spend their lives trying to change external results without addressing the invisible forces that underpin everything. They want more focus, but don't train their minds. They want more peace, but start the day frantically. They want prosperity, but it feeds the mind with scarcity early on. When you start tornu the mind in the first few hours, you're messing with that hidden foundation, and then the effects appear almost effortlessly as a natural consequence. In practice, this translates into something simple and powerful. Less internal noise, less self-sabotage, more consistency. You begin to act in a way that aligns with who you want to become, not with who is tired on that particular day. This requires discipline. Yes, but it's an intelligent discipline that protects energy instead of wasting it. And when that invisible force begins to change, an inevitable question arises. If everything starts within, what happens when you maintain that pattern for weeks, months, years? Consistency triumphs over intensity. The power lies in what you repeat, not in what you feel. There's a silent trap that prevents many people from changing their lives, believing that Transformation comes from intense moments, when in reality it's born from almost boring consistency. That perfect, inspiring morning, full of energy, helps, of course, but it doesn't sustain anything on its own. What truly shapes the mind is what you do when the day starts out ordinary, without desire, without excitement, without a special atmosphere. That's where identity is built. When you understand this, you stop waiting to feel something before acting. You act first, and the feeling comes later. That's a game changer. Discipline. The success of the first few hours doesn't depend on motivation. It depends on decision. 5 well-spent minutes every day are worth more than a perfect morning spent once a month. The mind learns through repetition, not emotion. And that's how prosperity. It begins to form from the inside out. In practice, this means simplifying, not creating giant rituals that you can't sustain. A similar schedule, a short moment of silence, a brief reading, a clear decision for the day. That's all. It seems like little, I know, but it's exactly the kind of little things that accumulate. And when you repeat this pattern, it starts to renew the mind without conscious effort, almost automatically. Only now, it's a healthy automatic. Over time, you realize something curious. The day may start out difficult, but you don't start out fragile. There's an internal foundation that doesn't fluctuate as much. And it's at this point that an important turning point occurs, because when consistency sets in, it begins to generate something greater than focus or clarity. It begins to redefine who you believe you are. The identity you activate in the morning governs your choices throughout the day. There's a simple yet powerful truth. You don't live according to what you want. You live according to who you believe you are. And that identity doesn't just appear out of nowhere in the middle of the day. It is activated early when you start your morning in survival mode. You act like someone who is merely reacting. When you start with intention, you act like someone who is leading their own life. The difference between these two states defines the decisions, boundaries, and even opportunities you accept or reject. The key point is that identity isn't built with long speeches, but with daily micro-affirmations, almost invisible. The way you talk to yourself when you wake up creates an internal label. I am a confused person, or I am a decisive person, I am a tired person, or I am a disciplined person. And the mind, the faithful executor, works all day to prove that this label is true. Therefore, renew the mind in practice. Morning checkups are an identity adjustment. In real life, this manifests itself in a very concrete way. You start saying no with less guilt. You choose better where to invest your time. You avoid conversations that drain energy, and you position yourself more clearly. That is applied faith, not as a theory, but as a daily practice. A prosperity, it starts precisely there. When your choices begin to reflect who you are becoming, not who you have been conditioned to be. And when that identity begins to solidify, something even deeper happens. You start to realize that you're not just changing habits. You're changing the kind of pattern you accept for your life. And that's the point that prepares the ground for something bigger. Because a solid identity naturally demands a new level of commitment to one's own path. When the beginning changes, the future begins to obey. Something subtle happens here, but it's profoundly transformative. When you change how you start your day, the future begins to respond differently. Not because the world has become easier, but because you've stopped acting on impulse. Tomorrow isn't built at the end of the day. It's prepared early on, at that moment when almost no one is watching, but everything is being decided from within. Most people try to figure out the future by rushing, making impulsive decisions, and overexerting themselves. But the future responds better to steady direction more than by force. When you start the day aligned, you plant better choices, and better choices create more stable paths. That's how prosperity. It is formed not as a sudden stroke of luck, but as a consequence of repeated decisions, made with clarity and discipline. In practice, this reveals itself in patterns. You begin to notice that certain opportunities arise more, frequently not because the world has changed, but because you are now paying attention. A trained mind recognizes possibilities that previously went unnoticed, and the more you practice, the more you learn. Renew the mind in the early hours. It becomes more natural to act intentionally throughout the day, without needing to constantly monitor yourself. And that's where a crucial point arises. When the future begins to obey your new internal patterns, you understand that it's not just about routine or habit. It's about taking responsibility for your own life. And this opens the door to the final level of this conversation, the one that separates those who understand the principle from those who truly live by it. Few people succeed because few protect the beginning. Here's a truth that's a little unsettling, but very liberating. It's not that success is rare. It's that silent discipline, that's rare. Most people even agree with all of this, find it beautiful, identify with it, but they don't protect the start of the day. And those who don't protect the beginning are always trying to recover something that has already been lost. That's why so many people are tired without knowing exactly why. Winning, in practice, is anything but glamorous. It's waking up when no one is applauding, choosing silence when the world demands noise, making calm decisions when everything pushes you to rush. When you do this consistently, you create an invisible advantage. While many start the day fragmented, you start whole. And this wholeness transforms into practical faith focus and firmer decisions throughout the day. The curious thing is that nobody notices this from the outside. People only see the result: clarity, consistency, progress. But what sustains all of this happens early, very early. That's where the mind learns to renew the mind instead of just reacting. That's where the prosperity it begins to form quietly, solidly, without fanfare. And when you understand that protecting the beginning is an act of self-respect, something changes completely. Because then the question stops being, will it work? And becomes something much deeper. Why would you stop doing something so simple that changes so much? Apply what you've learned and transform your day. Now it's up to you. What will you do tomorrow as soon as you open your eyes? Will you let the world dictate your pace, or will you take control of your inner self before any distractions? Remember, whoever governs the first hours governs the rest of the day. Ask yourself, am I planting clarity, faith, and purpose, or am I letting anxiety and noise get in before I decide who I want to be? If you truly want to change your life, the action needs to be immediate and concrete. You can start simply: breathe, give thanks, read an inspiring passage, meditate, or declare 3 truths about who you are. Small acts of discipline early on transform decisions, attitudes, and even opportunities throughout the day. Have you thought about how this will impact your week, your month, and even your entire year? Now, tell me, will you react or decide? Will you let your mind control your day? Or will you take the wheel before the world even wakes up? Make a conscious choice and watch the domino effect unfold in your life. And here's a challenge. Comment below what it will be. Your first act of dominance tomorrow morning. I want to see your commitment. Oh, and don't forget, if you want to continue learning about how to master your mind, reprogram your choices, and achieve real results, subscribe to the channel and activate the bell. The next video will delve even deeper into how to transform the invisible beginnings of the day into concrete victories.